welcome to the Leaders of Tomorrow 18 Hours daily platform for the Indian micro, small and medium enterprise sector. On the series, our endeavor is to ensure that we're talking to entrepreneurs to bring you expert views from across different leaders in the space. Today, we're talking about Swachh Bharat and what it really means in terms of an opportunity for the MSME space and whether MSMEs are really in the best position to be able to capture that opportunity. I have an expert panel with me today. Pankaj Jain, he is the chairman of the Sulabh Sanitation Mission Foundation. I have Sachin Maria, president of Franchise India. We also have Joji Thomas, CEO of ATS Greens, and joining us from Bombay, I have Dr. Amiya Sahu, founder of the National Solid Waste Association of India. He's the president and founder there. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I want to start with you, Sachin. So the government has essentially outlined this massive budget, this massive framework when it comes to waste management. And in the budget, it has said in terms of an incremental business opportunity for the MSME space, it says it's about 2 odd trillion. How much of this do you think MSMEs really are in a position to capture?
I think that's a very pertinent question right now with a lot of SMEs and MSMEs that we are wanting to sort of get into this thing. So I think it's a great initiative at the first place. But what is not clear is that the participation process is not really clear. So while opportunity has been carved out, but really there's no participation which I'm able to see right now from the sector. What is evident though is that there's a lot of movement which we are noticing in the waste management from a startup standpoint. So there's a lot of excitement which we are now noticing in the startup framework, but it's actually at more of an interest generation level. It's not actually at the execution level, if I can put it right.
Okay. Mr. Jain, I want to bring you in at this point. So there's clearly an opportunity. And you have been very, very closely associated with the government. You spearheaded, in fact, the entire Swachh Bharat mission. And you run now what is possibly the world's most successful NGO in the waste management space. How do companies, how do startups, how do MSMEs really tap into this opportunity?
See, Swachh Bharat is much more than making toilets, and you have been putting out that we have to handle the solid waste and the liquid waste. Just look at India. We produce something like 55 million tons of solid waste in the country, in urban areas alone every year, and we produce 1 billion liters of liquid waste, sewage, in India every year. But if you look at the Constitution of India, the responsibility for housing, urban development, sanitation, water, it rests with the state governments and the municipal authorities. So the theatre of action actually lies with the state governments and the municipal authorities, and the developers who are increasingly, in the fray to make the housing colonies. Now, the future is that all these cities should be, zero waste as a unit, and all the the housing colonies have to move to a zero waste unit in order to achieve clean India. But it's seen that a large number of the issues are not very economically viable. Just to take the example of municipal solid waste, although it offers a tremendous amount of opportunity in the sense of segregation at source, then transporting it, then removing of the things which can be recycled like plastics or metal, and then converting the biodegradable waste into energy to the extent possible, the dry organic stuff, and then the final disposals, and then the disposal of e-waste. All these are tremendous opportunities. But are they really viable? That is a very leading question. And here, I see a lot of role for social enterprises. The Section 8 companies, not-for-profit companies, NGOs, trusts, and startups on venture capital. I see a lot of opportunity here.
Sure.
And there's a lot of opportunity for CSR funds to flow into this sector.
Sure.
So this is a tremendous opportunity, but where the government can step in increasingly is to provide incentives by way of viability gap funding, by way of tax holidays, and other incentives the government can offer into this field to make it more successful.
Dr. Sahu, would you like to respond, to the points that have been raised by Mr. Pankaj Jain in terms of, where we stand right now? Let's take a step back, not just talk about the opportunity for SMEs and MSMEs, but talk about what really is being done in terms of waste management.
The concept or the philosophy of the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan is very good, excellent. It's a wake-up call to all the citizens of India today, because the Prime Minister has, has given the alarming call. And it's not that easy to make the whole country to a zero waste country. I think it will take about more than 5 decades, I would say, unless and until there is a participation of the people at large. And how can you motivate them? There has to be some system analysis. We lack in system analysis in this mission. What is the roadmap? What are the the gaps? What are the blockades? And whether it is viable or whether it is feasible, how to change the mindset, this is the analysis. And who is going to do that? It is the government has to do that.
Would you want to respond to that? Go ahead.
Yeah. Now, what he rightly puts is there has to be a protocol for everything. If you want to dispose waste, let's say there's a colony. So suppose he runs a colony and then he has to be in charge of disposing the waste. So the protocol and then the injection of the viability gap funding, if these two things can be managed, then it will be very economically feasible. There's one more thing I would like to add. You made a very important point about advocacy, the mindset change is very, very important. Why people defecate in the open? It's a mindset. People say that they've been doing it for 300 years, rather millions of years, and what's wrong with it? So they find it very difficult to change. And look at I was telling some time back about this agri-waste burning in the villages and the towns. It's causing a lot of pollution, but people don't understand that unless we change their mindset by teaching them, by advocacy. So there's a lot of role for NGOs and public-private participation, social enterprise into teaching people and to change their mindset.
Okay. So since we're talking about public-private partnership, Joji, you are with a real estate company. Just help us understand what is the kind of opportunity companies like yourself can have in the space of waste management, because are there clear guidelines about how you should go about it, and if you do set up your own waste management centers, what kind of participation or help do you really get from the government?
See, given a large part of the housing coming from private entrepreneurs, private players developers has to have a major role in this effort, no doubt about it. So from collection to segregation and processing and disposal of processed manure and other things, we see good opportunity, great opportunity for small and medium players in this country. Certain regulations are already in place. In most of good housing complexes, STP is a mandatory requirement now. So STP is already, capital expenditure is already there in boutique housing. What we need is more clarity on regulations so that everybody strictly follows certain regimes that we can bring in across board. Every state should have those norms. Another option is that the biofertilizer which is generated in the complexes should substitute the chemical fertilizers. The chemical fertilizers can be, you can add more taxes on that so that the usage reduces. And of course, we use that fund to promote. Promotion has two parts. One, they have to be collected from the city centers, then it gets transported to agricultural, farms and other places and get distributed. So the government can use that tax on the chemical fertilizers and use that fund for this expenses so that it become viable.
Let's take a quick break at this point. On the other side, we will continue this discussion. We're talking about Swachh Bharat and the opportunities for the MSME space, and we will talk about what really the role of private industry can be. To stay tuned. welcome back. You're with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow on MSME Dialogues, and we're talking about how corporate India can work effectively with the government to ensure its role of Swachh Bharat and what really the opportunity is for the MSME space. Just before we took a break, we were talking about how developers like yourself are working in the area of waste management. But Mr. Jain, how do you think the government can work with developers like in 80s Greens, like Joji, to ensure that A, they're being compensated for the initiative they're taking on their own, and two, to ensure there are more developers or more corporates who are taking active roles when it comes to waste management?
There's a lot of scope for PPP, as has been pointed out. And there has to be a lot of very close cooperation with the municipalities. Because if you take a PPP model, which ultimately, let's say, is in charge of collecting all the waste from a city like, let's say, Lucknow, for example, and then transporting it, and then converting, removing the recyclables, and then converting the balance into a khad, which can be this organic manure, which can replace the inorganic manures. It will work as a fertilizer. Unless the municipality commits and actually supplies that number of trucks full of the solid waste every day, the unit will not work. There would the government's role would come in, that they must support the PPP. It's not enough to sign an MOU. It has to be a continuous process. So I feel that's a very important issue which must be taken care of.
Probably, my thought is that the transporting the domestic waste to a different location and segregating and processing it probably won't be the right solution, and the current thought process of the government is to get it processed in the complex itself, the colony itself. That is what we are trying to do. But yeah, that need more technology support and more service providers. We are lacking that. That's a great opportunity for new players to come and fill that vacuum.
Sure. So you're saying there is clearly an opportunity for startups, small companies, MSMEs, SMEs. But one thing that I'm sort of picking up is that funding also is becoming a bit of an issue if these smaller companies are to go ahead and be effective. Sitting where you are, what are companies telling you? Do you see enough interest as far as funding into these organizations go?
Sure. So I think if you try and capture the discussion so far, there's been a social need which has been highlighted by the government. There's a policy which has been in framework. I think what Mr. Jain has been highlighting is that there's enough thought being given to sort of putting it all together. But actually, neither the developer nor the government's gonna execute it. That's not their business. Business is that you need participation from private sector. And essentially in this category, it would be MSME, because it's a fairly large micro operations that you're looking at. So you need a lot of micro SMEs participation in this. What I think you've rightly highlighted is that the corporate CSR fund, the government funds, all would come in as a funding opportunity. And I think we need an economic framework apart from the policy that has been laid out. How does that fund eventually go down to the right people? How do we create an industry out of which wherein people want to participate and have economic viability out of it? And I think it's to a large extent been branded as a social change. I think you need to make an economic framework of it, and I clearly see that direction being taken, but there's a lot to be done. So I think funding won't be a problem once you're able to sort of cap the opportunity. Like we are speaking about $13 billion industry opportunity. Now, all we need is to sort of put the right kind of channel to reach out to these participants.
Dr. Sahu, would you agree that we are really in the need of an economic framework, because there's clearly an opportunity as far as MSMEs and SMEs go, but what we need is a framework that's put into place to ensure effective participation on the part of these companies?
Well, before this, I want to react to whatever our friends they have commented on this. You see, you are talking about the biodegradable waste convert into compost and is alternate manure for the agriculture, is then the chemical. Understand, it's fine. But for example, Bombay or Delhi, and we generate about 8 to 9,000 tons per day of the waste. Out of that, 50% is biodegradable, and suppose we convert into compost, is about 3 to 4,000 tons per day compost will be generated. It's fine. Who is going to take? Nobody will take if you give them free of cost also. Look, I am in this field since 76, I know. Because the transport cost is so high, it is much more than your compost value of the compost. Who is going to take it? Number one. Number two, the compost what we are generating, from this street waste and other waste, the mixed waste, the biodegradable waste, and it is not to the mark. The NPK value, which is the real, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium value, as per the, the compost is required, the composition, it is not to the mark. So today, whatever the compost is being converted from this solid waste, okay, there is no taker. Let me tell you one thing. Secondly, I want to comment on PPP, that is public-private partnership. Till today, none of the PPP project in solid waste is successful. Most of the PPP projects are in arbitration. Why? Because there is so many lacunae. Even the contractors, they do not understand the moment they take the tender, the condition has to be properly read out. Otherwise, after 2-3 years, they feel a lot of problems. They cannot collect the money for operation. Then they leave the site. Secondly, yes, government has to, put economy, money. The money has to be, that's very important for in this Swachh Bharat thing, especially for this municipal solid waste. Instead of this compost plant, why not we have a decentralized biomethanation plant? All this biodegradable waste, it will generate methane gas that can be supplied through pipe, and after generation of the methane gas, whatever the slurry comes out, that is a very good manure. The government has to identify the real experts in this field.
Dr. Sahu, quite a few responses coming in from our panel here in Delhi. Go ahead.
Because we don't have technology, because we never thought it is necessary for us to think of ways and means of using this waste into productive means, we are saying we should not do anything about it. That is not I am agreeing to. What I say is the state responsibility to do more research on this, bring in more technology into it, so that this can be more effectively used, this manures. I am not disagreeing with you for different technology to use, create gases and other things like. But immediate, what I have next, Credai Cochin has done a wonderful thing. They have created localized composting and gas generation units at every complex. Use the entire manure for the horticultural requirement of the complex and the nearby places, and they are created zero waste complexes there in Cochin. If at local level they were able to succeed, it can be replicated many places. I am not saying that is going to solve the entire problem of the country or the cities like Bombay and Delhi. We need to think of ways and means and technology to deal with that. But that should not be an excuse for not doing anything right now.
I think if I can respond, the learnings would not come from the sector. By now we know that the sector behaves in a certain manner and there are certain perceptions been made. But if you pick up learning from other sectors like education, healthcare, they were having similar kind of discussions taking place a decade back. What really brought the change was innovation at the ground. Innovation cannot be at the top. It has to be bottom up, it cannot be top down is my view on it. Now how do you do that? We are speaking about innovation in business models. We are talking about technology being introduced at the innovation level. I think Mr. Jain spoke about viability gap, and that's the funding level which we are talking about. And I think that's really a huge opportunity. So if you asked me about the thought that what's happening, I feel waste management would see the largest number of startups probably from a market opportunity. But it has to be marketed and there has to be some kind of a initiation which is done. I think what you're doing is a great thing. It kind of reaches out to people and say there is an opportunity. Where there is an opportunity, I think we've got enough smart people who would find viability as well as means to operate it.
Why hasn't that started happening then?
It started happening. I think government, I compliment this government for bringing up at least issues which are which are relevant. I think where it's failed, and it will fail for a country as large as us, because we've got only two ways to do it. One, we create a policy, or we create a policing. These are two things which we do. I mean, he can best be given a notice to say that, you know, you got to have this thing done, but that's not his business. He will not go the last mile to create innovation to make it viable.
Sure.
So I think what we are doing, what we are seeing is great. What I can forecast, if at all, is that you'll see a lot of participation from the startup.
And to add to that, you know, and also comment on what he said. He mentioned about the biomethanation plant. It's a very, very good model. I've seen the technology, and I think there's a plant like that just outside Bangalore, where, you know, you have a lining, you have a deep pit, and it has lining, and then you lay out pipes, and then the solid waste is put into this pit as such, a very large pit, and then these pipes have holes, so the methane is created and then taken out. But the question is again the economic viability. And there it becomes whether the MSME sector will enter into it. Unless it's viable, it won't enter. So whereas you have the problem of disposing waste, and you have the technologies available, but the whole model has to be economically feasible. So therefore, there is the question of government entering by way of, you know, giving some kind of incentives, which I was mentioning, or viability gap fundings. And other point which he made, I want to add to that people prefer chemical manures because it's easy to transport, takes little volume, and that's why you find for example, in Jharkhand, you know, traditionally every household used to dig a pit and put them organic stuff into it so that it would be converted to manure, and in the next season they would use it. But now look at Punjab, they're using 3 times the requirement of fertilizer and pesticides. And that's damaging all the groundwater. But nobody's looking into this question. They're not using any the organic manure any longer.
Sure.
So these are the questions which we actually, all of us, including the government and the private sector, should be addressing.
Okay. I wish we had more time on this show, gentlemen. Thank you, though, so much for coming in. And if I can kind of summarize what we've heard today, there is a huge opportunity for the MSME space. We've started seeing some participation already, but there's still some way to go. Pankaj Jain, Sachin, Joji, Dr. Sahu, thank you so much for joining us. That's our edition of Leaders of Tomorrow MSME Dialogues. If you need any expert advice for any aspect of your business, do feel free to write in to us and get in touch with us. You can write into us at leadersoftomorrowtimesgroup.com. You can reach us on social media using the hashtag LOT, or you can call us on the number that you see on your screen below. Thanks so much for